All right, a very good morning to all of you. Apologies for the slight delay in starting the program. We were, of course, ready, but I understand that since Magnus is on, I believe that many of our students are preparing for that as well. But I'm very delighted that all of you are here, both the faculty members as well as the students. It is indeed my proud privilege to welcome all of you to this seminar on law, diversity, and sustainability that we are doing in collaboration with the University of Hawaii Law School. We are very delighted to welcome the Associate Dean of the University of Hawaii School of Law, Professor Denise Antolini. In addition to her, I am very pleased that we have two other distinguished guests of honor, and all the three being friends of JGU, Honorable Mr. Justice Michael Wilson, Judge Supreme Court of Hawaii, and Honorable Ms. Justice Sabrina McKenna, another distinguished judge of the Supreme Court of Hawaii. I am also very pleased to share with you that this seminar was put up in a very short notice, initially with the help of Kagesh Gautam, and then later with Alex Fisher taking the lead. So I'm grateful to both of them for taking this step. Before we formally move into the program itself, I want to mention that as some of you know, we have an extraordinary relationship with the University of Hawaii as well as the state of Hawaii itself. The relationship has grown over the years quite substantially, not only just between both our universities and societies, our courts as well. The National Green Tribunal in India, even several judges of the Supreme Court, including the former Chief Justice of India, they had visited Hawaii and worked in relation to a conference that was hosted there by the Supreme Court of Hawaii as well as the University of Hawaii. Over the years, this relationship has blossomed into other forms of partnerships which involves our students. It started in a very modest manner with a few of our students going and pursuing a summer clerkship, judicial clerkship program at the Supreme Court of Hawaii. Now that has expanded with at least 5 of our students pursuing this program, and every year it has become more competitive, and we have the rare honor of the judges of the Supreme Court of Hawaii around this time being in India, and this afternoon they will be personally interviewing our students to be selected for the summer clerkships at the Supreme Court of Hawaii. Never before an international court of that kind, particularly in the US, has hosted students from other parts of the world, and definitely not from India or Asia. It's a rare honor that has happened, and I'm grateful to Justice Michael Wilson and also Sabrina and the Chief Justice and other judges of the Supreme Court of Hawaii for supporting this program. For those students who have been part of this program, it has been a transformative experience. Time and again, they have told us that being in Hawaii and engaging with the court and the judges and the law school there has been truly inspiring and significantly transformative, and they talk about those experiences, and they have also inspired other students to think about it. So once again, I'm grateful to my friends here for trusting us and deposing that extraordinary faith in our institution. I also want to thank all of them for being here. They just landed last night, and they took this journey to come and spend the entire day in Sonipat. Tomorrow and day after, they will be part of a major international conference which the National Green Tribunal is hosting, which is being inaugurated by the President of India at the Vigyan Bhavan. I understand some of our students and faculty will also be at the conference. So it's truly a remarkable relationship that we have evolved over the years, and I am grateful to the 3 of them who are here. Murthy, can I now invite you to make that brief announcement, and then we will go into the program.
I take great pleasure in announcing that we are appointing Professor Denise as an honorary visiting professor of our Jindal Global Law School.
So we are issuing this appointment order as Honorary Adjunct Professor of Law at Jindal Global Law School of OP Jindal Global University with effect from today, 24th March 2017.
Like this. Yes, sir. Thank you, Ron. This is such a pleasure.
you would like to take over from here?
Okay, then thank you so much, and welcome everybody to the first panel today. We're going to have 4 speakers now which will talk to us about judicial policy making with particular focus on the environment and public interest.
Alex, there are a few more inaugural part of it. Can you please just look at the program?
Yeah. No, that's okay.
Very short.
Yeah, then for the inaugural address, could I invite Professor Antolini to please speak?
Okay. I was delighted that you were skipping ahead. So first of all, aloha. You can say, oh, that's namaste. It's very spiritual and personal exchange. So we really are here in the spirit of aloha. I came here 2 years ago on a whirlwind trip that Raj arranged, and we fell in love with you, with JGLS, and the partnership has been growing ever since. And first of all, thank you very much for the great honor of joining your faculty. I'm sure my list of responsibilities will be coming soon from your dean, because with the privilege also comes responsibility. We have so much enjoyed many levels of our growing partnership. Christina Lizzie, one of our students, is our first student to enroll here, and we want more students to come. We want students to come from here to Hawaii. And so Raj, as usual, named all the amazing aspects of this partnership, and so we're here today to continue that, to grow that, and I'm also sharing the aloha and best wishes of my dean, Avi Soifer, who came the first time and was really, really impressed and wish he could be here. So thank you so much, and we're delighted to spend the afternoon with you.
Thank you, Denise. Now I call upon Honorable Justice Michael Wilson to deliver his presidential address.
Well, this is, let's see.
In the middle.
Here we are. All right. This is a moment that I've looked forward to for a long time because of the experience that I've had here at JGLS. And I have to acknowledge that it's especially exciting to be here with my colleague, Justice McKenna, as well as our co-dean from the University of Hawaii, but to be in the presence of the avatar, as we call him, of justice for India, the dean, is a great privilege as well. But mostly, it's the faculty and the students that Justice McKenna and I had the honor of becoming associated with officially as adjunct faculty members. So I can't tell you how many times I've spoken behind your back, that is the faculty members and also the students, about how remarkable this institution is in the context of what's happening in India. And now I'm very grateful to be able to speak instead of behind your back in front of you to issue some remarks today. So Raj, are these just introductory remarks, or should
That's right.
I proceed?
Yeah, please.
Okay.
That's your address, yeah.
All right. So should we go ahead with the PowerPoint?
Yeah.
Okay. Why don't we get started here, because I did have a message that I did want to bring to you, and I'm speaking about an issue that's of global importance that, if I mention to you the dramatic keyword, I'm sure it'll be familiar to you. So anybody in the room that has not heard the word climate change, thank you, this is forward? Okay. Anybody in the room that hasn't heard climate change, please let me know. But now I finally get a chance to speak to the leaders at JGLS about climate change, the mitigation of climate change, and the idea of protecting the earth, because we do come from a location that has the distinction of being, in the human consciousness, the collective human consciousness, probably the ideal environment. And it was recognized as such by this astronaut that came to Hawaii, who'd been in space and seen the entire Earth rotate every hour. He'd been there longer than anybody anybody who'd been in space in 1995, and he recognized Hawaii as the most beautiful place on Earth. This is what we're talking about in a way when we talk about climate change, the students and the faculty, because the future of the United States, the future of India, and shall we say the planet is dependent now on leadership. We have a lot of knowledge about what's happening with climate change now, and that knowledge reflects the future that we're headed towards. 3 different models of a future. The first model is one you're all familiar with, I'm sure, the exploitation Nigerian model. That means that the prevailing interests, whether we're talking about business interests or political, maximize natural resources for their own benefit at the expense of the public at large. Sustainability, like climate change, if I asked you to raise your hand, everybody would raise their hand about familiarity with that idea. And then, excuse me, in some places, restoration is the model. Switzerland, New Zealand, where you identify key ecosystems to try to make things better. But overall, now this is an interesting headline that, as you know, went around the world, came right to my heart because of the beauty of India and its people, and it in some ways doesn't really represent your future, maybe, but that's a powerful thing when you close 5,000 schools, which happened in the last few months. And so the reality that I'm bringing to you and asking you if you wouldn't mind to step back just for a moment and consider in terms of a time frame, sort of a transcendent concept of where we're going now on Earth, because you're the ones that are the architects in many ways, I would submit it as the future. So you can see the recent events show that global warming has become a very powerful scientific issue. In Australia that has the Great Barrier Reef, they say that a war on global warming is necessary. The scientific community, the political community. Those of you that love the ocean, this is probably a disturbing picture that I received from my leader, Dean Antolini, but this could well be Hawaii, it happens to be Indonesia, but this is what's happening with sea level rise, coastal erosion. Well, the reality for everybody in this room, who I know cares about the law, cares about the rule of law, cares about those individuals that are going to be affected in the future by climate change, 2 degrees. If there was only one thing I'd ask you to remember today, it's 2 degrees. My goodness, the world's organized around 2 degrees. Because if we get to 2 degrees, this is the sort of thing that will be happening with massive increase in not just, if you will, climate migration, but also disease. The World Bank president says that fights over water and food are going to be the most significant direct impacts of climate change in the next 5 to 10 years. I cite him because he's a grounded individual. Not one of those individuals that you might say is overly impractical about the future and the degree to which we have to make commitments to protecting the environment. This is a grounded financial leader. And one of the great leaders of our contemporary times, which many of us in the room are worshipful of and wish that he was still there, is President Obama. Well, when President Obama sets up and identifies the most important issue facing humanity, of course, he's looked at terrorism, he's looked at human trafficking, arms sales. He's talking about climate change as the most significant issue. This is probably the most widely regarded judge in the world on the issue of the environment. He's very clear in his message that the single most important legal issue facing judges globally is climate change. Why would Mahatma Gandhi be suddenly thrust into climate change? You see what he said about his life experience? A small body of determined spirits fired by an unquenchable faith in their mission can alter the course of history. He was coming in the tradition of Ashoka. So let me just ask and be a little bit, if you will, intrusive and ask if you can raise your hand if you've heard of Ashoka. Wow, just a few people have not heard of Ashoka. This is sort of like if in our country we asked, how many of you have heard of George Washington? You know, my goodness, this is the avatar, sort of in the line of Raj Kumar, of the idea of the rule of law. As you know, he was a creator of the rule of law at a time 300 years before Jesus, after the Battle of Kalinga, where he decided that rights are important and came up with this idea, the idea of the rule of law. And the rule of law has progressed to the point now where we have an extraordinary, and I'm lucky that I'm giving this presentation in front of Armin Rosenkrantz, because in many ways he's been a leader for me, and Rosen, I'll be interested in hearing more about your thoughts on this. But this is a powerful statement of the rule of law, maybe not quite the same as the rule of law that arose after the Battle of Kalinga, but this is important. All the countries of the world coming together, making a commitment to 2 degrees? That would be an endorsement of the significance of what we're talking about here. But the rule of law, being able to get together as a society and succeed. And institutions have now developed that, at this point I could ask the students in the audience to not think of yourselves as students anymore. You are leaders now. If you made it to Jindal Law School with its altruistic goal, the idea of do the right thing anyways, the idea of helping society at a global level, you have become leaders, and I'm asking you to own this issue. Be proprietary about it. You're sitting in this room as collaborators now, and the professors that you have, people like us, we live in a sweet spot. We won't be here in 40 years. We're going to leave to you an earth that very few people can recognize unless you're the best scientists in the world and the best leaders. And the best scientists and leaders are saying, please, you've got to protect the future generation in this planet. But given the stature of Jindal, it's rather remarkable that this has the highest rating in India that a law school can have. And rather remarkable that it's done so with this altruistic mission. So you're poised to own this issue. There are institutions being formed that you can be part of. The Global Judicial Institute is for judges who are getting together on the idea of applying the rule of law to the environment. This is the World Declaration on Environmental Rule of Law from the World Commission on Environmental Law, which is an extremely important commission from the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, the oldest conservation organization in the world, and we have the co-chair here. And this is a very recent declaration on the environmental rule of law that, again, we need to have Jindal embedded in this program. This is where the academics come together with the students, the World Commission on Environmental Law. And we have something to contribute in Hawaii. Again, thanks to Dean Antolini, who led many of those that wanted to have an environmental court. An environmental court institutionalizes the idea of having technically aware, scientifically educated, and legally positioned, legally, if you will, independent judges who can apply the rule of law wide. We have 2 degrees we have to contend with that is now being addressed in case law. But we need the attorneys that can articulate this and move the issue forward and hopefully be able to institutionalize as much as possible the idea of the application of the environmental rule of law. In any breath that somebody speaks internationally about environmental courts, any breath, should also include a reference to India, because you have the most powerful environmental court, your Green Tribunal. The courage that it's shown is internationally famous. So I am so excited that I know somebody in this room at some point is either going to be working with the Green Tribunal or will be on it, and I will thank you for that. Well, nature-driven leadership. We have institutions, we have scientists that are saying 2 degrees is important. We have a lot of law students around the world that do law papers on this. But leadership, nature-driven leadership to implement is the critical component to make this happen. Purveyors of environmental law. Oops. Now step back for a little transcendent moment. This is my hero. He doesn't like me to say that, but we're standing in my office. And the relationships that form, the commitment in the law, the idea of doing your homework, that all of those things, Raj Kumar came, brought to Hawaii, combined with our Supreme Court, combined with our law school, and now we're moving forward on these issues. And of course, you're part of the moving excitement. And I invite all of you, if you can, to come to Hawaii, perhaps in a formal way as an extern for our court. because you have had people precede you, people to break ground, to create the trail for you, including your former Supreme Court Justice who spoke so articulately at a Green Tribunal conference about why the courts of India need to be independent to preserve the quality of life and indeed preserve life under the provisions of your Constitution. So this is our court gathered with your Chief Justice as well as Justice Kabar from the Green Tribunal. Our Chief Justice is at the top, who's a great guy that would like to come here, but he's just so busy. And then we're surrounded by justices of the Supreme Court of India and Hawaii. Now, this is just another moment that's worth thinking about. This is Justice Gita Mittal, you know, who is an extremely influential justice who has been an inspiration to us, but this is the kind of collaboration that is so important in being able to provide leadership, nature-driven leadership. We managed to convince Professor Unkale Kalyani, I don't know if she's here or not, but I told her that I would be displaying her picture just to make the point that when she comes to Hawaii, she does work, and this is a very important group of people in Hawaii that are doing their best to support the environmental court. And you saw Denise Antolini next to her. All right. My goodness, Kagesh and Denise at my favorite restaurant, but there was a lot of important work going on. This is, again, a connection that needs to be developed between Hawaii and India and our Supreme Court and Jindal Law School. These are my law clerks mixed with my judicial assistant and the externs from India who have really brought a great distinction to our court for your school. And I ask you to, again, think about when you come to Hawaii, this is a work session, although you do get a chance to see the natural beauty. It's a work session that in large part we'll be asking you to focus on in terms of a lot of legal writing, a lot of legal analysis, because part of what we're trying to do is not provide a vacation, but provide a way to be able to help protect what we often consider the most beautiful place on earth, and, of course, bring it back to the place that might be the spiritual epicenter, the rule of law epicenter, which is India. Okay, I'm going to be concluding here just by pointing out this is a social issue, climate change, unlike any other, in that it has an impending social horizon. It's got the problems got to be solved soon. And this kind of collaboration between determined spirits, fired by unquenchable faith, doesn't take too many people. If there are 4 of you in this room that decide this is what you're going to devote your career to, it could happen, and we want to do what we can to make that happen in Hawaii. These are cases. They look, I mean, you're nerd-like. You read cases. You're used to sitting in quiet, being living a life that some would say is boring, but it's not. These are powerful moments, these cases that are establishing now that climate change for your generation is a real issue that you can take to court now. It's at the entry level of the courts. We don't know how far it's going to go, but it's an important message for you because you can pick up on this and you can protect your country and you can protect the world with this kind of litigation. The court in Netherlands decided that there was standing to bring a climate change lawsuit against the country because it wasn't meeting its obligations under COP21. In this case, we have young students who are juveniles that are from the District of Oregon that are bringing a similar case to establish the duty of government to comply with its public trust doctrine under its responsibilities regarding climate change. So, are we going to go for the exploitation model in the future, the Nigerian model, or the restoration model? You'll be able to decide. I don't know if we'll see it in 40 or 50 years, but you're going to find out. And that's the most important animal in many ways to me. Justice Dean Kumar and I went exploring India to find the tiger. And just an incredibly inspiring animal that shows that you've got a powerful, beautiful, ancient ecosystem if you have it in the wild, but it also expresses India, because this is the oldest civilization, just as old as China. just as old as the Middle East, but you have preserved nature and you still have the tiger, so I'll thank you ahead of time for any work that you're doing to protect the tiger. But actually, these little animals are even more important to me than the tiger. I know they look scary, but that's Manu on the left and Ivanica on the right, and I think they deserve to live in India with tigers in an environment where their little lungs are not going to be poisoned. So, thank you for the opportunity. Aloha, as Denise says, aloha is our version of namaste. Thank you all for having us. Alex, we haven't met personally, we're just over the email, but thank you so much for your hard work too. And aloha.
Thank you, Mike, for that PowerPoint presentation. You know, I've always been very skeptical of PowerPoint presentations, and over the years I've felt that they just don't capture what needs to be captured, but this could be an exception to that. The other PowerPoint presentation was by Al Gore on the Earth movie, which was also a fascinating PowerPoint presentation. So thank you so much, Mike, for that. Alex, we are good in time. Don't worry about it, because Mike's substantive presentation, the next session, he has done it now. So he'll have a shorter remarks during that time. Now I invite Honorable Ms. Justice Sabrina McKenna, Judge of the Supreme Court of Hawaii, to deliver a keynote address.
Aloha.
Aloha.
I'm so honored to be able to address you here today. 35 years ago, I graduated from the University of Hawaii, William S. Richardson School of Law. And this law school is rated consistently as the most diverse law school in the entire United States. So today, as you saw in the title, this discussion is about law, the environment, and diversity. So I would like to focus on issues of diversity and the importance of diversity in the legal profession. So what do I mean by diversity? Well, I see a lot of faces here today. I'm sure you all come from different backgrounds, different parts of India, different parts of the world, perhaps with different socioeconomic backgrounds, perhaps religious backgrounds. You may have different reasons that you're here. And that was the same for me when I went to law school. So what do I mean by diversity? I was always taught in law school that you don't reinvent the wheel. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to use a definition that has been defined by the University of Oregon. And diversity means encompassing acceptance and respect. It means understanding that each individual is unique and recognizing our individual differences. These can be along the dimensions of race, ethnicity, gender identity, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, age, physical abilities, religious beliefs, political beliefs, or other ideologies. It is the exploration of these differences in a safe, positive, and nurturing environment like you have here at Jindal. And it's understanding each other and moving beyond simple tolerance of each other, but embracing and celebrating the rich dimensions of diversity contained within each individual. Diversity is what awakened me to the power of the law and helped create in me a desire to go to law school. I was born 3 years after the 1954 United States Supreme Court decision in a case called Brown versus the Board of Education. And that was a case in which the United States Supreme Court said that separate but equal division of races does not work, it's unconstitutional, and that all public schools must be integrated racially. Very controversial decision at that time. But 17 years later, in 1974, I entered the University of Hawaii, and I was really fortunate to walk on, you're having a sports festival. I went through college on a basketball scholarship. And it was because there was this law called Title IX in the United States that had just passed 2 years earlier. And this law was very simple. It just basically said that any educational institution receiving federal financial assistance cannot discriminate against people on the basis of gender. So it was a gender discrimination in education law. This law was co-authored and sponsored through Congress by a Japanese American woman lawyer from Hawaii called Patsy Takemoto Mink. She married a Caucasian named Mink. She was a valedictorian of a public high school in Maui, on the island of Maui, the first student body president to be a woman, 1944 graduate of Maui High School. She went on to the University of Nebraska, and at that time they had segregated dormitories by race. She, being Japanese American, was placed into the international dorm, which was only for non-Caucasian people. She led a student rebellion against this discrimination and got that policy changed. She wanted to be a doctor, and although she was so smart, none of the 20 medical schools to which she applied would admit her because she was a woman and now she was married with a baby. So she decided she wanted to go to law school. The University of Chicago accepted her as an international student. I guess they didn't realize that Hawaii was the United States territory at the time. If you look at her graduation class picture, it's all Caucasian men with a short 4'10" Japanese American woman in her picture, in the school class picture. She came back to Hawaii. She couldn't get a job at a private law firm. The Attorney General's office finally hired her. She was able to get a government job. But in order to fight against the kind of discrimination that she had endured, she ran for state office, and then she ran for federal office. In 1964, she became the first non-Caucasian woman elected to the United States Congress. And 8 years later, she co-authored and drafted this Title IX law. So when it passed in 1972, the University of Hawaii started athletic teams. Up until then, there were no sports teams at the University of Hawaii. It was only men's football, men's basketball, men's teams, men's wrestling. There was no athletics for women at the University of Hawaii. They started a women's basketball team. I grew up in Japan, U.S. military background. My mom was Japanese, my father was American. When I went to U.S. military schools in Japan, I played basketball. So when I walked on and tried out for the University of Hawaii basketball team, I made the team and they gave me a scholarship. So it ended up paying my way through college. And that's when I realized the power of the law to effectuate social justice. So, this law is so important because in 1972, when this law was passed, in all of the United States, you may think of the United States as being a place that is gender equality. Well, in all of the United States, in 1972, only 7% of all United States law school graduates were women. Only 7%. And only 9% of all U.S. medical school graduates were women in 1972. So this law changed not only the United States, but think of all the international students that come to the United States. Think of all the women international students that come to the United States to study. And this was led by a Japanese American woman from Hawaii. You know, Hawaii, I'm really proud of being, I'm not from Hawaii, but I'm really proud to be able to say I live in Hawaii as my home now, because I think we've given some wonderful leaders for a very small state of 1.4 million population. 1.4 million, not 1.4 billion. We've created some important world leaders, including President Obama.
Yeah.
So you probably know that he's from Hawaii. He grew up in Hawaii. My daughter and Denise's son graduated from the same high school that he went to in Hawaii. So, diversity within the legal profession leads to justice for members of the entire community. It's important to understand that it's African American attorneys, including the late United States Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall, that led the fight against racial discrimination in schools in Brown versus Board of Education. And would you know that his wife is actually from Hawaii, was from Hawaii? Justice Thurgood Marshall had a Filipino-American wife from Hawaii. And it was a, Patsy Mink I've already talked about, and there were many LGBT lawyers that led the fight against discrimination against the LGBT community in the United States. And of course, in terms of what we've discussed today, there are so many people that cared about the environment that have led to the fight for environmental justice, not only in the United States, but throughout the world. So, diversity within the legal profession is critical for social and environmental justice. And as I've been a member of the legal profession for 35 years now, I realize how important diversity of experience and culture and just the different backgrounds really is. So I don't know Indian tort law, but in negligence theory law in the United States, it's the failure to do what a reasonable person would do under like circumstances. So how can a person who has not had similar life experiences understand what a reasonable person would do under such circumstances, right? Or who can better understand than a person that has been subjected to discrimination why a woman or a member of a racial or religious minority might not immediately report that discrimination? Or who, other than these people, would really understand the debilitating effects of discrimination? Or who can understand how important the differences are in perspectives? I realize that now, being on the appellate bench, that the difference, I used to be a trial judge for 17 years. I got to make kind of my own decisions, but on an appellate court, you're not alone. You sit with other judges that have different perspectives and different backgrounds, and how important it is to have all of those different backgrounds and how it leads to better decision making. And talking about diversity, all the studies show that in the business environment, companies that have more women and more minorities, different perspectives, actually do much better. The bottom line increase is 20 to 40%. It's just amazing. All the studies show how important diversity is to success of any organization. So, it's been 35 years since I became a lawyer, and the legal profession in the United States has changed dramatically. Now we have about 1/3 women, lawyers. About 1/3 of all judges in the United States are women. Unfortunately, we're not doing quite as well on racial diversity. Hawaii, fortunately, what's the beauty of Hawaii is that we have no majority. We have no majority race in Hawaii. And so everybody Hawaii's not perfect, but I think it was President Kennedy that visited us before he became president and said that Hawaii is what the world aspires to be, because we do have no majority. So I encourage all of you at Jindal Global Law School, as Justice Wilson has said, we're not going to be around. You are the future leaders of India. Not just India. You are the future leaders of the countries that other countries you may come from. Or India has such an important role to play in the world in the future, whether it comes to social justice or environmental justice. You are the leaders, and you can make a difference. I want you to recognize that, because I want you to know that 35 years ago when I started law school, or 43 years ago when I graduated from high school, as a daughter of a single mother, because my dad had died when I was a kid, I never, ever, ever envisioned becoming a lawyer, becoming a judge, or being able to be on the Supreme Court of the state of Hawaii. I never, ever envisioned it. So you, amongst you, are the leaders of the future of this world. You can make a difference. Bring your diverse experiences and take the world by the storm. It's reins. You can control the world. And I want to see you as leaders of the future. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Sabrina, for those inspiring reflections. I'm indeed grateful to you for, sharing us with those extraordinary narratives about the history and evolution of some of those great social movements that has actually led to both constitutional reform, judicial reform, as well as social justice. Thank you so much. Another thing which you may be aware is that as just several weeks ago, you should have known that Hawaii was the first state in the United States to sue against the federal government for the ban order passed by President Trump, and also the Hawaii's federal judge passed an order, it's a stay order against that order itself, so it's a temporary restraining order. Is it the judge whom we met, the federal district, the federal...
I'm not sure that Derek Watson was
Derek
Watson is his name.
Yes.
And he was in the same law school class as Barack Obama.
Okay, great.
And
Well,
what's really important is that he is Native Hawaiian. He is the only Native Hawaiian judge, federal judge in the United States.
so in some ways, Hawaii is a very inspiring place, not only because of all the things that we've shared with, but its unique geographical presence makes it one of the most diverse societies in the world. And I think now the judges in Hawaii and lawyers in particular are hopefully saving the world in many ways. So thank you so much for that. We now come to the end of the inaugural session. Now we begin the first thematic session. I will request Dr. Alexander Fisher to chair that session. It's called Role of Judiciary in Policy Making, Environment and Public Interest. We will have 3 speakers in it, Denise, Armin, and Vinod. So, yeah.
So I'll try to introduce the speakers as quickly as possible. I think I promised them I can do it in 5 minutes. I'm not quite sure whether I can, because they're just such remarkable individuals and there's so much background there. But I think the first thing I want to say is how wonderful it is to have a judge as a speaker, 2 judges in the room, when the topic is judicial policy making, because we have so many academic models out there for how judges make decisions. You have the attitudinalists that say law doesn't matter at all, it's just policy preference. You have legal realists who say, sometimes it's what the judge has for breakfast which makes the decision. And there's now actually empirical quantitative evidence from Israel there, and it seems to be true. And then we have strategic models that tell us the judges worry, what will the next bench do, will we be overruled, what are the other branches going to do? And now again, there's a shift, and Lee Epstein tells us that all her work on judicial policy making was probably wrong. And what matters is how judges can maximize judicial prestige. So all these theories out there, but then when you meet a judge at a conference and you listen to them, you get a sense of how important intuitive knowledge is, the judicial habitus, and the practical experience. So I hope that for a lot of students studying constitutional law, it's going to be a transformative experience to listen to the 2 Supreme Court judges who are in the room today. So maybe the first thing I can say, you immediately know that a judge is also a human being now from the wonderful introductory lecture of Justice Wilson. He grew up in Hawaii. You can see how much he relates to the ocean, the forests, the love for the environment. He was a community activist, deeply concerned about Hawaii's magnificent natural resources, and was also in charge of Hawaii's State Department of Land and Natural Resources. Yeah? And I think you can already see how much that personality and context goes to some extent into judicial policy making. The other beautiful thing about this conference is that how do cases come to court, who provides the evidence, who pays for the expert opinions, all of that is related to the litigation support structure. So what we have here today is 2 cause lawyers. Yeah? I don't want to, of course they're phenomenal, brilliant academics, but both of them have been involved heavily, not just in the litigation side of things, but also in the organization of the groups and litigation support structures that bring cases to court and systematically change judicial policy making through litigation. So what makes them special is not just their academic brilliance, their degrees, their publications, their teaching, their contributions to academic institutions. but there are lawyers who aspire to justice outside the ivory tower of academia. So for instance, Professor Antolini has practiced public interest law with the Sierra Club Legal Defense Fund, and Professor Rosenkrantz, of course, has founded the Pacific Environment, an international NGO based in California. Yeah? I'll just give you one anecdote about their academic achievement. Both of them are Fulbright Award holders. I think Professor Rosenkrantz has 5, which is a record. But then again, I'm sure Professor Antolini is going to catch up at some point.
That was great.
Last but not least, and maybe more importantly, there should be never, never, ever an event with only lawyers. So it's absolutely fantastic. So we have these Herculean judges and the cause lawyer, but it's wonderful that Professor Vinod Yashulu, Vice Dean of the Jindal School of Government and Public Policy, is joining us today as well. I hope he will bring the critical traditions of the Delhi School of Economics into our discussions, keep us grounded, telling us about the thin impact judicial decisions can have, the limitations of judicial policy making, very little time, very little resources for policy debates. And above all, I think how legal imagination and the languages of laws and rights is often much, much more limited in comparison to other ways in humans articulate their dreams and hopes in the non-legal field. And so maybe one final footnote for the tea break. When you meet Professor Yashulu, you can ask him about a story about his time as PhD student in Florida and Halloween and a suit. Yeah? So I'll leave this as an icebreaker for you for the tea break, and then without much further ado, I would like to invite Professor Antolini to get us started on the first panel. Thank you.
Let's see if your brilliant IT people have.
Yeah, it's there. You should just tell which one.
I
Oh,
think I just need to.
it's right. This one.
So first of all, Alex, thank you. Such a pleasure to meet you, and thank you for all your hard work. And to Kagesh, who couldn't be here, but we know that there's always a lot of hard work that goes into creating these events. And I want to thank everyone involved, because I've been on the other end, and all of us have. And when they come together, it's a miracle because people have worked very hard. So I'm going to touch on some of the themes that Justice Wilson already commented on, but just a couple of quick comments up front. One is, you may not have picked this up, but our Hawaii Supreme Court has 5 justices. You were shown a picture of them. You have 2 of them here. That's extraordinary. And this is their, Sabrina's 2nd trip, Mike's 3rd or 4th.
So he has a property here.
Yeah. I hear
Yes, your house.
some offices space coming too. So anyway, our commitment here is extraordinary. So I'm going to be focusing on one of the things that actually India and Hawaii has in common, but we have such different models that are developing. You have the National Green Tribunal, which you raise your hand if you know what it is. How many of you have visited it? Just a few of you, and Christina's doing some internship there now. So National Green Tribunal is an extraordinary model for the world, for environmental lawyers around the world, for environmental judges around the world, as kind of the iconic environmental court. And I remember when I first came here 2 years ago, I just went because I wanted to see it, and I was absolutely amazed that it existed. I felt like I had died and gone to heaven as an environmental lawyer to walk in and see the National Green Tribunal, and walk into court and see the lawyers who were arguing, and there on the bench was Justice Kumar. And I didn't know him at the time, but I was so awestruck. I stayed, and my dean kept saying, "Let's go," and I'm like, "No, this is the ultimate." And little did I know that we would develop a relationship with the court, with Justice Kumar, and that Hawaii would become part of this global story of the environmental courts movement. So the story I'm going to tell you is about our very young, very small environmental court. And even if you are not that interested in the environment, I'm sure you're all interested in systems of justice. This is a story about designing structures of justice. It's not my title, but that's where I want you to think, like, even if you don't, marine pollution is not your thing, it's how do you design a system to create justice for whatever issue you're interested in, okay? So One more point of contrast before I dive in. We've learned so many things from our good friends from India visiting us and visiting here. So when Justice Thakur came with Justice Sikri last summer, he emphasized to us that India, well, let me ask you, how many lawyers does India have?
2.1 million now.
Really? It's grown that much since
Yeah.
he was here. So the number he gave us,
1.4.
the number he gave us was 1.4 million. Do you know what the population of Hawaii is? It's 1.2 million. You have more lawyers than we have residents of Hawaii, not including our tourists. I mean, that's phenomenal. So this relationship, every time I think about it, I think it's remarkable. So we have a lot to learn. Let me talk about Hawaii's Environmental Court. I should mention one title that I've acquired since I've visited with you is that last one, which is Deputy Chair of the IUCN World Commission on Environmental Law. And the International Union for the Conservation of Nature is something I know Armin knows very well. I'm relatively new to it, but became kind of launched into its world because the IUCN Congress, which is like for us, the Olympics or the World Cup, I guess would be more interesting, every 4 years is around the world since the 40s. Well, not Congresses since the 40s, the organization's been around since the 40s. But for the very first time, the IUCN met in the United States, and they chose Hawaii for reasons that connect with Justice McKenna's comments and Justice Wilson's comments. So we were quite honored to have it there, and you'll see a few pictures of that, and it's kind of, I say to some people, it's kind of teleported Hawaii into the international scene in a way that we could not imagine if you had asked me 2 years ago. So have any of you been to Hawaii besides Christina? Armin, any of the students? So the answer is not yet, Professor, not yet, Dean Antolini. I have not been there yet. So just to give you a geographic orientation, you might not know where we are, but it's a little yellow star in the middle of the ocean, and then you see that kind of tail of islands that goes up to the left-hand side. That's the northwestern Hawaiian Islands. So we actually have a very long island chain that's uninhabited, which is a marine monument. But our little islands are the ones that are right there where the star is we're just kind of midpoint between Japan and California. Let's just put it simply. So wherever we go, we either have to paddle a very long distance. That's a joke, right? But that's how the Polynesians settled Hawaii, with canoes. Obviously we fly.
I have elsewhere told that there is no non-stop direct flight from Hawaii to India, but if there is one, it would be the closest part of US from India.
Yeah.
So if there is a non-stop flight between Hawaii and India, because if you see LA to San Francisco to India is a 15-hour flight, so it would be, and here if you're going from the Pacific, it's around 8 hours to Japan and then another 8 hours, so it will just be the closest, but although there is no flight. So we need to work on it.
I remember you talking about that when you came last time. So one of the things we think about all the time being from Hawaii and like Justice McKenna, I am actually not born and raised there. I originally grew up in California, but it's very much my home now, as we think all the time about being on islands in the middle of the ocean. It's an important part of our being, and it's one of the things we love about our life. So you saw this slide before. These are the main Hawaiian islands. I will go back and tell you a few stories about some of them, but I'm not going to do a pointer, but the gentleman in the yellow, could you point to the third island from the left? Okay, that one. No, you got it. The one you had initially. Down, in the middle. No. Yes, first stop. Okay, right there. Don't move your finger. Don't stop. That's where you would fly into Oahu. That's Honolulu, and then the university's on the lower portion. Thank you. And then I'm very fortunate to live on the upper portion of the island. So that is the most populated island, about, I think it's 900,000 now. And then the big island down
900,000,
right.
most populated?
Yeah.
Might have in Jagdishpur village more, I think.
And then the island on the far right, which you can see is nickname is the Big Island. It's the largest geographically, but not by population. But that's where we have the active volcano. And Justice Wilson showed you some pictures, and I'll show you a few more. So that's our one of our many volcanoes. rainforests, we have endangered species, we have incredible iconic marine mammals, beautiful coastlines. So like Justice Wilson, Justice McKenna, we very much treasure our home and enjoy sharing it with the world, but we have challenges. So I'm going to focus on the birth of Hawaii's Environmental Court, and again, this is a story about designing a system. Where do systems for justice come from, and where do they go, and what are the challenges? So from 2000 to about 2012, about more than 10 years, there was one woman in particular, and she's pictured there, right there with Justice Kumar, who fought very, very hard to establish an environmental court in Hawaii, and she came out of what's called the America Beautiful movement, which is people who enjoy landscapes and gardens and kind of a more aesthetic view of environment. And she worked very hard, and she was unsuccessful for years, trying to get our state legislature to design this system. And but she didn't give up. She was inspired by there were very few models, but there was one model in Vermont of an environmental court, more of a land use development court. But I'm going to tell you a little bit more about why it succeeded. So our court was established just less than 2 years ago. So we were very much in the early stages of figuring it out, but it's garnered a lot of global attention because in general, those who are involved in this issue globally think about Hawaii now as the leader for the United States, which is still kind of overwhelming to us, but we are kind of the leader in the United States with this very small environmental court, which is still evolving. And Justice Kumar plays a part of the role in the story. So in May 2014, the state legislature passed Act 218. Oh, in the upper right, can you tell what those are in the upper right? Those pictures of what? Dead fish and sharks, and these. We had a huge spill in our harbor of, well, India has a lot of sugar, right? India raises a lot of sugar, Hawaii does too. We had a molasses spill, a huge, basically silo of molasses spilled into our harbor and suffocated our marine life. That molasses spill shocked the state legislature, shocked their conscience, and so this idea of environmental court gained a little bit more traction. And then Chief Justice Rechtenwald on the lower left became convinced that we needed to do more to focus on our natural resource violations. We had a lot of pressure on fishing, but very poor enforcement. And really, it was the shift in this is my opinion, in the judiciary's position on this bill that made a difference. So for years, the judiciary had opposed creating an environmental court. They didn't want another court. They didn't want additional obligations. But this man, the Chief Justice, and others, they changed the judiciary's position. And once the state legislature saw that the judiciary had changed its mind, I mean, not to say snap my fingers, but otherwise it was politically infeasible when the judiciary itself opposes designing a new system. So again, I want you to kind of think about this in whatever context that you're interested in. The legislature also built in a 1-year delay in the legislation, I think because they didn't quite know if there would be any problems. These are some of the grassroots people involved in creating the court. The purpose of the court was to promote and protect Hawaii's natural environment through consistent and uniform application of environmental laws by establishing environmental courts. And I'm going to go back to both of these terms. What is the environment and what is a court? Because there's so many different definitions. The first thing that the Supreme Court did was appoint Justice Michael Wilson to head the Environmental Court Working Group. So HIECT is the Hawaii Environmental Court Working Group. And this is when he became a member of the Supreme Court with Neil Abercrombie, our former governor, who also signed this bill into law. So this is all very real. This is not for us ancient history. Justice Wilson chaired this working group, reported back to the legislature, and essentially said, if I can paraphrase, fine, let's go. No changes. Let's create this environmental court. So actually, before the court started, we had an environmental court training for the judges, and your Justice Kumar beamed in from India, videotaped his remarks. Justice Benjamin from Brazil, Judge Preston from Australia. So we had global leaders in the environmental courts movement beam in and talk to our judges who had not even opened their doors yet about what it was like to be a member of this international movement. And again, that's something to think about in terms of design, is making judges, institutions feel a part of a broader community, that they have colleagues, because that gives them, here's the story, institutional protection against political pressure. Then we had Justice Kumar come in June 2015, again, before the court opened, like 7 days before, keynoting address at our law school. And then July 1st, 2015, the court actually opened. But I did not say it opened its doors. It doesn't have any doors, and I'll explain that in a second. So it was, when I ask you to think about a court, particularly for law students, what do you think about when you think about a court? What is a court? Do you ever ask yourself that? What is a court? I'm going to ask you. Are you a law student? What is a court?
There is a forum which tends to resolve disputes.
Okay, a forum that resolves disputes. And what about your friend next to you? What is a court?
I agree with his definition.
You agree? I have a different definition? That's a good one, but
I think I'll go with
oh my goodness. The brilliant answer accumulates a lot of support there.
one more thing.
Yes.
It establishes the rule of law, and wherever there's a violation, it restores it back to the original rule.
Okay, establishes the rule of law, and where's the violation, restores it. So interestingly enough, well, I think it was a brilliant explanation from the three of you. It doesn't necessarily need to be a physical thing. It's a forum. That's the first thing you said. So our court is actually created as divisions within our existing courts. So our circuit courts and district courts are our two lowest levels of courts. There's no courthouse. Remember I mentioned you can go to the NGT here and how it was like a vision from heaven for me. We have no courthouse for our environmental court. There's no new staff. There's no experts. You have experts on your NGT. And there are no superpowers like on your NGT. There's no extra funding for training or materials. The environmental judges who are selected for this court do it on top of all of their other duties. What do you think of the design so far? Challenging. No resources, no courthouse, okay. But nonetheless, it was launched with a lot of support. So there are two levels, the circuit court level, which handles civil cases and felonies. There are actually very few cases, but they tend to be quite important involving environmental review. And there's a very important felony case pending right now, so I won't comment on it, but it involves the slaughter of internationally protected seabirds. That is actually very, one of the individuals involved is about ready to be sentenced. So these are very serious environmental crimes, and environmental review cases go to the heart of development pressures on the environment. District court are criminal and petty misdemeanors, and that's interestingly where a lot of the action is. It's fishing violations. Did you use the right net? Did you catch a fish that was too small? For us, that's extremely important. Remember, we're islands surrounded by ocean. So this doesn't have the extraordinary reach of your national court, but for us they're quite important. The first case that was filed actually under the new environmental court involved cane burning, so sugar cane burning, which I think, do they still burn sugar cane in India? You're used to that? So this was an organization called Stop Cane Burning. And that was the first case, and it was settled. But most of the cases do not involve air pollution, they involve environmental review. And there were a few of these criminal felony cases. In the district court, they tend to be, as I said, these smaller cases, taking an undersized octopus, fishing in a protected area, illegal netting, things like that, which are extremely important because of the sensitivity of our marine resources.